Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first talk. She has a master's in animal nutrition in UNAM, and she also has a postdoctorate in excellence, and she has a lot of courses and diplomats in agribusiness of IT, SM Campus Querétaro, and swim production technology course in the University of Illinois. She's graduated ITE Campus Querétaro. She's done many research and farm administration of swine. She was also a professor in Campus Querétaro. She has worked in many companies as Deca, Nutris, DCM, Lesafre, and currently she's a consultant in nutrition and animal health in her own company called Nusen. Ladies and gentlemen, please a big applause to welcome her. I'm gonna be standing as much as I can, and then I'll be sitting back. We'll be talking now about a subject that I believe that we are never or almost never considering, and it's important. There are people who do consider this subject, and it's worth to bear it in mind. Do we have the remote to control the slides? Well, what we'll be discussing now is the quality of fresh materials or fresh tissues that we utilize for the manufacturing of animal origin products, what that represents for our production system of feeds or fats of animal origin is something that has a lot of reverence uh, of importance, not only in the classification that is a little bit more specialized, but also, thanks. But we also have now in the husbandry sector a bigger demand. Cool. A bigger demand of the market of a better quality of all materials, especially of the raw materials that have an animal origin for the same reason I had mentioned. So we'll be talking a little bit of what quality standards we are having for these fresh materials before we process. And well, first of all, we have to know what are fresh tissues, and that goes from the offals, heads, the paws, the lungs, blood, feathers, skin, bones, etc. But they are actually fresh products, fresh tissues. How fresh are they actually? We should consider as manufacturers and also renderers that we are of these products that they are not actually things that are byproducts. Even though I said that last year, they are not byproducts. I took that from a talk that we had in Atlanta from the Dr. Antonio Burto. He clearly said that when they get to the processing which they will be rendered, that will be a raw material. So we have to consider as a renderer of feed and meat, they are raw materials, even the offals that we receive here. And as such is the way we should treat them. Does this work? Do I have a pointer here? Hold up, sorry. Okay, so if you take a look here in the pictures, we have the offals. What happens when we have the chicken without the offals, and how do we treat this raw material to render it? And as a raw material, we should be sure that we are handling it properly. Not only of this raw material that we use to manufacture our meals or our fats, we have to bear the determination of the physical characteristics or the different groups that we will be talking. And based on that, we have to look the best homogenization possible. This is key, and we will be saying this again in another conference we will have. But right now, we have to see what's the useful life of the material we are utilizing as a raw material. We also have to define the time of stocking and uses that is obviously related to the time of life of the product. This has to be a correct rendering of the materials, but this depends on several different participants. The provider, that's subjective. The manufacturer, well, it depends 100%. I don't know, it's subjective also. What should we do when we're thinking of meals of animal origin or products of animal origin? Well, that the capacity or the quality of one meal, it will depend on the time that passes between the production of that raw material and the rendering of the meat meal in this case. So the moment in which you sacrifice the animal up to the moment in which we are obtaining the products and the fresh materials to render in them. So what does this depend on? Well, on the temperature, it depends on the aqua activity that we have in those materials and the size of the particle that you as manufacturers, you should know this already probably, right? So based on these three factors, we will have a different bacteria charge that will represent an enzymatic activity. And this activity associated mainly to one enzyme that's called descarboxylase, it will generate different levels of fatty acids. And these will imply in different levels of acid and also biogenic meals. We are considering all this and also nitrogen that's non-partake. We have to consider that it can be ammoniac. It can vary a lot, and we will be talking about that also in a while. So we go back to the issue that I have mentioned at first. These are fresh materials, but we shouldn't, but we should discard it, right? You can sell it to any person, but this is not as true. But it's also important part that a lot of producers use this for self-consumption, like pig producers or poultry or cows. They use that to feed their own animals. So it's really important to bear in mind that when it is with this function, you have to make an auto classification. And this classification, even though it's carefully done, it has to be focused on a client, specific internal client. So I can say, no, I'm the best company of pig production in Mexico. So as I make my own meat meals, I use them. No, it's not that easy. Finally, within these companies in which you have rendering factories, you also have to have the way to sell this product to our client, which are feed factories, which is related to nutrition. So we have to consider this because you have to have this classification of the materials that we'll be using to make the different types of byproducts of animal origin. And the manufacturer has to select what they will be sending to their provider. So this will allow them to make a classification of the raw material. So not only is about what the provider does, but it also has to do with what we do when we receive in a rendering factory, so we can obtain our meals. How is our raw material? That's really important to know. In that process, the process of the composition starts. And this decomposition is associated with the putrefaction of amino acids because they are decomposed. That's why we call it also biogenic amines, that is associated mainly to the presence of microorganisms. And these microorganisms are the ones that start producing these enzymes, these carboxylases that we talked about a while ago, to precisely start the process of the composition of that organic material. And after this, we can say that we finally have the production of those biogenic amines that generate, if you can see, well, I don't have the pointer here. Hold up, where is it? Ah, it's this one here. All right. So if you observe the protein, which for us is really important because we have to remember that the proteins are the ones that form the structure of most part of the tissues or all tissues of the body, it will be transformed through proteolysis in peptides through different amino acids that are used after to resynthesize the protein. That's what we usually do in the morning when we eat eggs, when we have some eggs. We're having some protein. The protein goes through different enzymatic processes. We absorb the amino acids, and then in our body system, we incorporate them in the formation of proteins. But what happens when we have the composition process? When we have that, what happens is that these amino acids will be transformed in biogenic amines, which are stamina, spermina. I didn't select the ones that usually we represent or that have a bigger presence in the process of the composition. And of course, this what implies that we have to be careful on the form in which we render and we handle our raw material. Considering that this is transformed in free amino acids and after in biogenic amines, this can produce changes in the quality and also can generate toxicity. Now, the biogenic amines, we don't understand completely how they are originated, but we will be talking about why are they are important. Well, they indicate the quality or the composition of any of these organic material. They are toxic for some animals in certain levels and also in humans.
Well, you can use them to provide flavor to cheese, but we have to be careful when we talk about the production of meals. One of the important challenges with this theme, we know sorry, translation apologizes, but our audio is very poor. we have to assure. Sorry, we're losing audio here. And this obviously allows us, it helps us to avoid so we have to remember the cold reduces microorganism activity, but don't eliminate them. And the process of handling at arrival and before. And these factors are hard to control under the conditions we have presently in our country and in Latin America generally, referring to the process of animal products. And that's the most important thing to me. The murmurs, the fresh tissues, that's why I quote them, they're not so fresh. They can't be processed because they are rotten. We have to dispose of them somehow. If we process them, they will cause problems in production when we'll have sanitary risks if we try to, if we have contamination, and an important risk is are the fines, because there are regulations to dispose of the residues. So we have to be careful because these are important losses. So what to do? We already know. What we have to avoid is precisely fast decomposition, fast rotting. We have to develop our standards, because I didn't find a legislation saying how we have to classify the raw materials we receive to produce animal meals. And surely in the United States, NARA must have its ways for doing this to deliver standardized products. And we talked about standardization last year, having to do with the ways we mix different meals to reach a level of proteins and amino acids, etc. So another factor that's important is how we are going to use new technologies to have the largest amount possible of good quality product to, in the end, obtain a first-class meat meal. So we have considered alternatives. Biogenic amino acids are very expensive. There are other factors like total volatile nitrogen to establish the biogenic amino acids. This is an indirect method because the biogenic amino acids, well, total volatile nitrogen is volatile very easy, like methylethylamine, which is produced by the bacteria digestion during the storage and freezing, part of what we were mentioning. So freezing won't solve the problem necessarily, as well as ammonia produced by the disamination of amino acids, which we mentioned, and catabolites of the nucleotides that are part of the cells, and other nitrogen composites, which are volatile, associated with the rotting of products like the rest of biogenic amino acids. So the last level of volatile nitrogen this is an indirect indicator of the amount of biogenic amino acids. So if I have less rotting, I'll have better digestion and pepsin. They are different analysis. I want to leave this clear. Here is the link for the analysis suggested to measure the total volatile nitrogen. It's a good indicator that can allow us to establish the ability we have to save the insides we're working with, or to preserve. The prevention is very important for us to do the best we can with what we have. We have to optimize our management, reduce the time between conservation of fresh tissue. It's almost impossible the way our systems work. So this is a titanic task. And another one is, if we know these two are complicated, so using fresh tissue conservation technologies, the technologies to preserve fresh tissues are based in lowering or suspend the microbe activity that causes the rotting of raw materials. Many ways can be used: heat, sterilization by heat. We receive the insides, we have to process it, or when we sacrifice the animals, we process it. This is very complicated. To lower the temperature, although this delays the activity of the microbes, it doesn't eliminate it, as we were mentioning, and it has a high cost. And we have something that can be important, which is humidity control, but this is not very profitable. So what remains as an alternative is using additives to control microbe development. So as an alternative that's natural, we can use organic acids. I want to thank Yvette Sierra because the information I'll bring you was brought by her. So I want to mention there is an important correlation between pH and the quality of fresh tissues. The use of an acid to preserve must be measured because the ability to maintain the pH in fresh tissues between 4.8 and 5.2, we can consider there's proper acidification of pH. From 5.3 to 5.8, we can have insufficient acidification. This can be associated with the low doses or an excessive amount of water in the fresh tissues. And 5.9 or more means we're not acidifying. What is the way we have the additives work? Normally, organic acid salts, because they have advantages in the sense they can't cause problems. But the problem we have with acid salt, like the ones I mentioned, like potassium sorbate, is that the acid comes with the salt, and this way it can't go into the bacteria to kill it. So first we have to eliminate the salt ion to join the union of hydrogen and then go into the bacteria. And then in the bacteria, will die trying to eliminate this hydrogen ion. And when we have a pure organic acid, what it does is go straight into the cell. So this process is costly. It represents wearing And what problems do we have? Now we talk about the wearing out. What problems do we have with purely organic acids? They're very corrosive. It's management that's very delicate. We have to be very careful in handling them with specialized teams. And obviously they're easily lost. Evaporation of formic acid at 70 degrees Celsius is 23%. And the loss will be proportional to time and temperature it's exposed to. It's the most volatile of all, but propionic and acetic are very volatile also. So we also have an issue of transportation of these pure acids. In Europe, there's a classification called ADR, and this means there are restrictions or risks to transport this material by road. And you must have maximum 5% of formical and 10% of propionic acetic. So all these products here must be submitted to thermical proofs in rabbits and aluminum metal probes to show they're not aggressive. And that's what was detected in Europe with regards to the organic acids. So one of the ways we could solve this, which is a new technology developed, is related to the use of lignosulfonic acid. It's technology from Norway, the extraction of lignine with sulfuric acid from timber. The only world producer is in Norway in a company called Borregaard. And with this concept, we could mix up to 60% of any of these organic acids with 40% of the lignosulfonic acid, which is 100% acid mixture. And so they could declassify the ADR transportation, reducing corrosion by 95%, evaporation and 70%. And there's a manipulation that's very safe. As you can see here, this is the lignosulfonic called as soft acid. It has a very low pH, but by the size of the particle, we can have very high safety for the operators. What's very interesting is that this product is approved by FDA for human consumption. This will be in the next presentation. As I mentioned, it's extracted from wood. It's produced by Borregaard in Norway only, and it has a pH lower than 1. Their properties is acidifier, antioxidant, and controls water. It's not a vehicle for the acids. It potentializes its function. So here we have a chart where we can see the percentage of salmonella elimination, propionic pure, formic pure, and 80% of acetic. So you have an idea of the degree of purity. The acetic we used in vinegar comes in 5%. So if you notice, there are 3 different doses. I hope you can see. So 1 kilogram per ton, 3 kilos, and 5 kilos per ton. When we combine with lignosulfonic acid, any of these 3 sources, what we see is that we can control as if we were in its pure form. We can also carry the organic acid, acetic acid, lignosulfonic with acetic acid, as you see, the efficiency is increased meaningfully, and there's a synergy between the acids. So why do we talk about acetic acid? Because if we used this formic acid combined with lignosulfonic acid, we could generate hydrolysis of the insides, and we would have a jelly and obviously a pressing problem. So the acetic acid is more friendly in this case, and the advantages are that the combination has smaller hydrolysis, acidifies very efficiently, it's highly bactericide and reduces degradation of the animal products, and also increases the quality of the meals and fats. With organic acids, I can reduce bacteria, enzymes, and reduce the undesirable factors. So there are some proofs of this here. The pH with acid or without, with this mixture, the pH can be much smaller. If you see, this is within the proper conservation pH, reduction of volatile nitrogen, putrescine, cadaverine, histamine, which lead to the formation of amino biogens. We increased production from 7 to 12% for reducing murmurs and more quality of fat. The increase in the price of sales was from 2 to 5%. So what do we have here? This is the work that was done in Spain, which was to prove at different temperatures. So they compared poultry and meat qualities, and they submitted these mixes from 10 to 15%. They froze the samples, and the doses was 3 kilos by ton. And it was interesting to observe the levels of digestible protein when we added the testimony. The sample was processed 4 hours after sacrifice, and then 32 hours, so 1.5 days. So what did we observe? The digestible protein was better. The amount of volatile nitrogen, total volatile nitrogen, was smaller, and this is the reason why we have more digestible protein. The pH was smaller, half a point, and smaller concentration of bacteria. So these were fresh insights. What happened with the meat meal? This allowed the larger digestible protein, and the variables were similar between them. So they could keep the quality, the freshness of the meat protein.
So the main conclusion of the works we've seen is that the offals improve the digestible protein in 18%, the meal meat, and 2% diminish the bacteria. Also, the volatile nitrogen was 65% less, the same way in meat meal, and the oleic acid it also showed an important decrease. So what we found with these mix is that it's a good way to conservate the tissues. What we see here in this graphic is that they were looking to improve the conservation of fish until the rendering with this mix and evaluate what was the quality of the fish and the meal that they obtain through this process. So first of all, what they observe is that it increased the quantity of produced feed and increase the production of meals as well with this mix. And it also increased the percentage that they obtained from fish from the fabrication of meals. One of the most interesting graphic is this one here, because here it shows with what quality increase, because not only important to increase it, but the quality. This is the quantity of fish meal in which they evaluate the levels of histamine. And they looked to what was the better quality between 1,000 and 3,000 parts per million. And what they observed is that when they used that mix, it diminished significantly the quantity of fish meal that had high levels of histamine. And the one that was less, it got the same levels. So they could maintain the same levels only by the application of the acid. So what did they see also in other research? That the smells also are less. So it prevents the rotting also, because here we have a test in which they have some control with 2.5 kilograms of the mix and another with 3 kilograms, which is the minimum doses that was recommended for these results. And they measured the pH after a carry of 24 hours, but after a process of sacrificing the animals in which the product was in trucks from 8 to 16 hours, depending on each case. So what did they see? That the pH of the product from the point of origin to the point of arrival, it was kept at a low level. The presence of enterobacteria was also diminished in a significant way. The volatile nitrogen showed a trend to be less also. So there's a linear trend to be lower and lower, and also the presence of smell was lower. These are just the result of what I've just said. We're just putting it in a graphic way so you can visualize it better, but there were some differences because this test was done with repeated measurements throughout time. So it is important to keep that in mind. The difference on arrival pH and enterobacteria and smell was important, but there were other factors like the smell in the truck, which was less. There was a low risk of strokes and also the stay time and the capacity of the trucks. So it's really important to consider that the routine of the process to obtain optimal results with the use of this combination, even though it doesn't exist, you could still observe and represent a conservation benefit that's really important. In here, we see that there's a less charge of enterobacteria and a less impact in the environment. So we have a bigger degree of conservation that increases the efficiency of the process. And under the conditions in which this test was done, we saw that this conservation diminishes the rotten capacity of the offals. What should we take from this? That the fresh tissues are a raw material and we should treat them like that. The quality that they have is related directly to the efficiency of the process and the quality of the finished products. And not only that, but also helps to diminish the waste. So the waste is going to increase when the quality of the tissues is less or worse. using alternatives that allow us to disaccelerate the process of rotting because we can diminish the number of microorganisms. It will allow us to prolongate the useful life of the materials that we will use to fabricate meat meals or fat meals. And what we observed is that the mix of lignosulfonic acid and acetic acid are the best options because we treat exclusively these organic acids. We don't have any salt, any other synthetic product that interferes with the effect, and is a very effective mix. The quantity that they recommend for this type of components, it can vary depending on the raw material. And again, thanks to Yvette because she helped me a lot with this part of the talk.